understanding the technology that powers the money is essential. Knowing the business drivers that inspire how the money is made is crucial. Bridging the gap between the mind of the technologist and the mind of the business is monumental. That is what TBF is all about. Let's start this never-ending conversation. It's time.
Friday, here for another episode of the Tech Behind FinTech, and joined with me, Matt Beecher. Matt, how are you?
I'm well, Namdi. Good to see you, man.
It is great to see you. Returning guest, good friend of mine. Really excited for this episode. So what we're going to get into today is the role and evolution of the Chief Revenue Officer in FinTech. And guess what? Matt Beecher is a Chief Revenue Officer. So we're going to have a really great conversation about this topic, and I'm so excited about it because I've always wanted to kind of dive in to this particular role. Before we start, let's do some housekeeping. We are streaming live from Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. We have a separate stream going from Instagram. For my Instagram people, join the YouTube channel. Just go to Tech Behind FinTech, and you can be part of the show when you drop comments in. So before we get into it, I want to officially introduce Matt. Also, you post comments, you can be part of the show. So drop the comments in and that will happen. So let's get into it. Today's topic, like I said, the role of an evolution of the Chief Revenue Officer. Matt is the Chief Revenue Officer at Interval. Let me read Matt's bio and then we'll get into the topic. Matt is a successful startup founder, business builder, innovator, operator, executive, and investor with a 25-year track record of success. He is a proven leader with deep experience in developing and enhancing growth across all facets of strategy, technology, sales, marketing, finance, operations, and fundraising from inception to exit. Beecher co-founded Red Star Ventures, a first-of-its-kind venture studio that creates companies, taking them from the earliest stages of ideation and growing them through their first institutional funding rounds and beyond. During his tenure as president, he led the formation of 6 companies and 2 exits. He also co-founded SCS Financial, an investment and wealth management firm serving families, family offices, and institutional investors. The company grew from 0 AUM to an excess of 30 billion before being acquired by Focus Financial for greater than 600 million. Matt is a native Bostonian and avid Red Sox fan. He resides in Austin, Texas. Amazing, amazing, amazing as always.
Well, thank you. Good to be here. What episode number is this, by the way?
Oh, we're at 202.
All right. Lucky 202.
Lucky 202, man. Thanks for calling me out on that. You know, you had me I had to think about that. So let's talk about it. Chief Revenue Officer. So like in reading your bio, you've obviously been involved with a tremendous amount of companies. You've seen companies go from startup all the way to fully built, all the way to exit. So you've seen various roles in the C-suite. This role of Chief Revenue Officer, I'm extremely curious about. It's not as ubiquitous as, let's say, CEO or CFO or CTO, which a lot of people know. So before we jump into it, right, let's get a high level overview of what the Chief Revenue Officer is.
So look, it's 20 years ago we weren't talking about this role, right? 15 years ago we weren't talking about this role. It is sort of tied into kind of the industry you're in. Whether you're a startup or an existing company or a mature company. But at the end of the day, you sort of break it down to a couple of components. And by the book, every company's a little bit different. But the role of Chief Revenue Officer is primarily a growth sales role, right? So it's an evolution from a sales manager, VP of sales, et cetera, somebody that's responsible for growth. But I think where the role has stretched and expanded is to make that more of an executive function. To think more about strategy as it relates to growth of the company, but also the contributors to growth, right? So it's not just, hey, we're knocking on doors and I'm carrying a bag and I'm trying to sell my wares. it's also, being responsible and culpable and accountable for other things that go into growth as well. What's your strategy? What's your messaging? So that brings in marketing. It brings in things like customer success, not customer success as a cost center, like, oh, I have to do this, I have to support my customers, but also looking at customer success as a growth engine, right? How do we sort of take, an existing customer, yay, hey, we have a customer, that's great, but how do we take them from, 1 to 2 to 3 to 4? How do we grow that customer over time? So, we're taking a look at different functions in the business itself and saying, okay, how do we sort of drive revenue and growth out of every aspect of that? And that, to some extent, includes product as well. We talk a lot about, product-led growth, PLG motion. That's a revenue driving function. So having good product as a piece of the whole package is critical as well, because it's going to drive your growth. So think about it as part strategy, part execution, but it is taking in all these disparate pieces of the business and bringing them together to create an engine that's going to drive growth and revenue across the organization. There's function underneath that. So it's not just pure sales, but it's strategy, it's customer success, it's marketing, it's product, it's all of these things bringing it together to say, how can we take a business from 0 to 1 and then 1 to 10? All right. And that's kind of the primary responsibility. Every company, Nambi, is a little bit different. There's a lot of debate around what things should fall under the purview of a CRO. Should marketing not? Should customer success not? So I think if you ask 10 different people, you probably get 10 different answers. But from my seat, it's the responsibility and accountability around the growth of the business, which makes your job really easy because you have a single metric. Are you growing? Right? There's not much qualitative measure to that. It's all quantitative. But it is sort of bringing together all the component pieces to have a cohesive plan moving forward.
Okay, a few questions, and we're going to get into it throughout the show, that I want to dive into. The first thing you said, if you look at it from a sales perspective, you look at the different sales roles, and then you said, okay, CRO. So if I'm looking, as I came in on the team as a, I don't know, junior salesperson, I'm growing in this organization, is that the growth path? Because what I've seen, right? When you look at, a lot of CEOs, some of them came from sales backgrounds.
Yes.
Right? They came through the sales ranking and they ended up becoming the CEO of this organization. So what is that pathway? Like, if you started mid-level in the organization, you are junior level, and you're gonna grow there for a while, what's the pathway to get to a CRO versus the CRO, if you look at it from a CEO versus, like, if you look at it from a sales perspective?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I'm going to take a roundabout way, to answer that, and I'll start with saying, gosh, everybody's path is different, and I think the label of this is FinTech, right? And FinTechs, sort of suggest that we're in kind of startup mode, and sometimes titles can become a little bit weird, but responsibilities don't. So if I'm, most startups, that sit there early stage, your CEO will and should be the primary salesperson of that organization, to start. I think we see a lot of, companies, especially early stage, saying, hey, we're going to bring in salespeople and that's how we're going to kind of ramp the business. The reality of it is that very, very rarely works. There's no one that's going to be able to sell better at an early stage than the CEO of that company or somebody in that kind of founder seat, right? The passion's going to be there. The origin story is going to be there. It's really, really tough to replicate that. And I think as a company grows, a startup grows, and it gets not to maturity, but kind of to that next stage, whether that's Series A or around there, then you can sort of start thinking about scaling that sales organization and bringing in folks to help do that. But it's a matching game, Namdi. I don't think there's a straight path to say, hey, I'm going to start as an SDR, then I'm going to go to an AE, and then I'm eventually kind of going to go to VP of sales, and then CRO, and then CEO. That might be a path that some people take, But at the early stage, and that's primarily where I've spent the majority of my career in AMD. It's just it's just all hands on deck, and you do what you got to do, and the cream kind of rises to the top. I was having a conversation, with someone yesterday, and and it was around sort of sales and getting into sales and sort of the startup world. And what I think is really interesting in the great kind of equalizer in startups, it's probably the last true meritocracy that exists out there. You either perform or you don't perform. And there's always a question of people that are entering into to growth or sales, and how do I start my career? Do I go work for Oracle and a big company, and is that where I start? Or do I start at startups? And the pathways and the end result are so different in those decision makings, right? So if I wanted to optimize for making a lot of money, I'd probably go work for Salesforce or Oracle. It's mindless work. You don't have to do anything, right? I mean, you're getting a lot of leads that are coming in, and you're just sort of processing those and sort of moving things down the pipe. Versus when you're a startup, you have a lot of different responsibilities. You have to be responsible for PG, pipeline growth, which is critical. Some people might not have ever done that before, been trained on it. You have to be scrappy. You have to be okay sitting in the abstract and not having kind of a clear path to close, or having a business card or a logo behind you that warrants somebody taking a meeting with you, right? It's a challenge, right? If you work for Big Co, you got a business card that's going to open up a door. You work for a startup, that doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. So you asked the question about pathway. I think my advice and what I've seen work pretty well is you know just get in there and do damage, right? Sell stuff, create opportunities, use the channels available to you. And the great things about startups is the cream does rise to the top. You either perform or you don't perform. And that's going to kind of warrant that sort of next stage of evolution from being potentially an individual contributor, all the way up to kind of having management responsibility, and then, ultimately kind of executive responsibility. But it's interesting. We think about pathways to become a CEO of a company. Now, the easiest way is to start a company and call yourself CEO, right? That's the easiest way to do it. And if you think about it, from an evolution perspective and where that sort of step comes from, you see a lot of folks emerging out of the COO role into CEO, and then the other path is CRO to CEO. And I think those are kind of two distinct pathways. Because if you think about, the role of CRO, they're basically taking the most critical function in the organization, growth, revenue driving. Like if you don't drive revenue or close deal, you don't have a business, full stop. So that kind of role encompasses absolutely everything in the business. And we see a lot of, CROs ascend to the CEO seat, because it is about growth, and it is about building a great product that people want, and then having a product that you can sell into market in a repeatable fashion, and that's part of the trick, to be able to do that.
And that was going to be my next question, because in the early stages, if you look at an early stage startup and you take a look at this CRO role,
Mhm.
I don't see the big difference between that and the CEO in terms of activity. Because as
Well,
you mentioned,
yeah, I've done both, and there's a big difference,
talk to,
right?
talk to me.
Yeah, I mean, the CRO role is, or the VP of sales, or whatever you want to call it, somebody that is responsible for growing the company. It's a performance-based role, and it's binary. You either grow or you don't. It's a massive amount of pressure to be able to kind of do that, right? Because you have a scorecard where a lot of other people might not have a scorecard. So, that's kind of a mindset shift, and people have to be comfortable with that you are in a performance role. That's sort of critical. But so I think you're right in suggesting that there are sort of real executive functions that relate to kind of the CRO role. But what it doesn't include, which is great, by the way, for some people, is the other responsibilities that a CEO has, which is dealing with external board members and investors and raising capital, and making sure there's enough money, in the bank, making sure that people are in the right seats, you're hiring the right people, et cetera. So, there's sort of a big difference between those roles, but you can sort of see the connection because, at the end of the day, whether you're Microsoft, NVIDIA, or, Interval, it's still the measuring stick is going to be, are you growing the business? The trick is, how do you grow the business, right? What is your motion? What is the product offering? What is the messaging? What is the story? Bringing all those things together so you can do things really, really well, like grow pipeline, which again is incredibly difficult in a startup, incredibly difficult. I mean, you're active on LinkedIn and other social channels. I was just telling a colleague, I have, probably over 500 LinkedIn invites that are sitting in my inbox. 90% of them are from salespeople. So it makes the game a lot harder. And that's part of sort of the excellence of that role, is to kind of figure out how you get around obstacles. You go over them, through them, around them, et cetera. Because, the world of sales, shoot, even in the last decade has changed tremendously. And we're seeing, things like cold calling becoming back in fashion because email is so cluttered, and noisy. LinkedIn is becoming wildly noisy, and so we're constantly thinking about tools and techniques to get a message out to our end buyer and having a conversation with them. Those are tough to do. Those are really hard to do. But that's part of the role, and that's part of the challenge, right?
When we talk about growth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Different aspects. Is it just in terms of, look, we have X customers and we need 2X customers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it, are we looking at growth just strictly from that perspective?
I think there's a couple of measures, and I like to keep things simple because it's really easy to get convoluted. There's probably three things that you want to measure. One is just straight up new ARR growth, new logos. Are you closing new business? That's an easy thing to measure. Yes, no, how much? Full stop. The other is PG growth, right? So pipeline growth. Are we growing our pipeline at an appropriate level to support our sales targets and sales goals? Right. So it's not just, hey, we brought in a new logo. It's like, oh, shoot, no, I need to bring in $1 million of pipeline growth every month to support what our sales targets are. So that's another component, to it that's really important to the measure. And then the other thing to measure is NRR, or net revenue retention, of my existing customers. Am I keeping them and am I growing them? That's it. Everything else is noise. Everything else is pure noise.
We talk about growing existing customers,
Mm-hmm.
selling existing customers more products / services.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Or structuring contracts in a way that they escalate over time, building in some features where we can take, a customer from, $50,000 to $100,000. How do we do that, right? And so that gets into product. Are there product features that are going to allow that to happen? Are there new features that we can add to a product that's going to require expansion? Are there usage metrics that we can try to hit and satisfy so we can expand that customer? It's really important because it's easier to grow an existing customer than it is to go get a new one, right? So what are the mechanisms? So when you think about the role of CRO inside of an organization, and CEO for that matter too, it encompasses a lot. It's not just the high energy, high pressure salesperson, buy this and then we go away. No, you got to stay in that relationship. It just doesn't go away. You have to think about ways strategically how you can expand those customers and expand them not only keep them but expand them. And so it encompasses a lot, Nambi. I think you're right on. I mean, it's a lot of that is product. So we see product-led growth fueling that expansion, and that's really critical inside of a startup, especially a FinTech startup.
I want to jump into that because you alluded to it in terms of product-led growth. In terms of, are you when you talk about product-led growth, is
Mhm.
that for existing customers?
I think about it for existing customers, right? I mean, look, what's the best known PLG company out there is Slack. Like you're in it, everybody's on it, and all of a sudden everybody's using it, right? And it's almost instant. That's all PLG motion, right? That's all the product. For a lot of companies, and we, speak to us, we tend to sell at the enterprise level, which is not the easiest thing to do. But for us, it's like, let's get into the door, let's crawl, let's walk, let's run. And that's the way we think about structuring our relationships, our pricing, our commercial terms. And it gets to, here's my product. It could be a monolithic product and say, well, that's it. That's all you have. But the real magic comes in when you take this monolith and say, wait a minute, can we break this out into component pieces and actually think about now creating sub products in that main monolithic product that we can sell, upsell, do whatever. We've seen it a million times. Do this trial, and then we're going to convert, to this, or your base level only gets you these amount of features, but premium gets you this amount. It's like, well, I want premium. Like I don't want that. I want this. So, those are motions that a lot of people use in different industries and different aspects to drive, NRR, which is a really critical metric for the health of a business. Are you expanding your current customers? First stop though is keep them. Don't lose them. Don't lose them. Right? That's as critical as anything, because you've spent a lot of money and you've worked really hard to acquire a customer. Do not lose them.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny because I just thought about earlier in my career. I was doing release management, and when I talked to organizations, that was my first rule. It's like, listen, yes, you want to launch a new product or service into this really with investment banks, and I said my number one rule is let's not break the existing features in production. So
Right.
we literally, when you said that from a sales perspective, I just thought about that. That was my rule. I was like, listen, my first rule is not to, yeah, we want to release this new shiny widget, but I don't want to break existing widgets that people are currently using.
No.
So it's
Be really careful.
interesting when you mention that, like, you do not want to lose, because like you said, if you look at it from coming to an organization, as you mentioned, crawl, walk, run, how do I get into this enterprise? And selling to enterprise is extremely difficult because everybody wants that everybody wants it, right? Like,
Yes.
you go into a party, it's this very attractive person, everybody's looking at that person, everybody wants that person, so it's a long line to get to that person. Same thing with enterprises, right? They know, listen, if I close this deal and we have a five, if they don't, we have a recurring yearly license renewal, and we know they're going to renew it for the next 5 years easy.
Yeah.
That alone, on, if you look at it just from an individual commission, that makes some people's whole salary, and they're good.
Absolutely.
So and to lose that is catastrophic to
Yeah.
the business. Have you seen, I want to get into so many different topics, but since we mentioned that, because I love I love when I talk to you, you have so much, you have a vast experience in different things that you've seen. Can you give an example, past companies and different things you were involved with, in which that happened? And what was the reason for that loss of that customer?
Oh God, it's really interesting, and it's a complex question to answer. One thing I have seen consistently happen, and this is going to sound weird coming from a quote unquote sales guy, but being over aggressive in the sales process and perhaps overselling somebody is the leading contributor. It's not the product, it's the leading contributor to churn. Now, a lot of salespeople are trained to be super aggressive. You just mentioned commissions. Oh, I get paid I need to eat. This is great stuff. I'm going to, go into a prospect. I'm going to get as much money out of them. I'm going to, you know, pressure them, bully them into a sale because I'm a closer. That's what I do. What happens so often, Namdi, is it comes back to bite you because you oversold. You might have charged too much. And now you have buyer's remorse. So if I'm to think about it, the main contributor to churn, it's that. It's that. There's a Goldilocks scenario here that you have to be really careful of. You want that customer, that new customer to be happy, to feel like they're getting value. In startup land, your product is never done. It's never perfect. And you have to be okay with that. But more often than not, it's not the product that drives churn. It's actually the process that drives churn, which might be a little counterintuitive. It's like, what do you mean? I sold the deal. That means that they want it. That means we have product market fit. And it's like, no, it doesn't. It means that you just coerce somebody into buying something. And, unless they stick around for like 6 months that's the only proof point you have.
So let me get this straight. From your experience, one of the things that you've seen consistently not work out after the sale is made, in which they end up losing that customer, is aggressive salesperson basically over promising, saying, this thing can fly, land, go underwater. It can do everything that you can think about and things that you're not thinking about. Buyer gets it and says, you lied to me. This is not working out the way I thought it was, the way you sold it. We're using it. We're frustrated with it. And you know what? We signed the contracts. We just can't leave it, but we're not going to renew. And they're going back and forth, dealing with the support team, not getting, the support team is like, listen, this is our product. They're like, well, this is not what was sold to me. So from the support team's perspective, they're like, look, we've been supporting this. What you're asking for is not even possible in this iteration of our product. But from the customer perspective, they're like, the guy who sold it to me said it was, and this feature's not there. And I wanted to paint that scenario. Do I have that, or is that?
Yeah, no, it's right, and the knock-on effects are pretty significant through the organization. You just painted one of them, and there are thousands of memes on the internet, that depict the same thing, where a salesperson oversold something and just threw that mess over to CS, customer success, for them to kind of now deal with, right? And so the customer success people are pulling their hair out. I can't do that, but if they had hair, they'd use the same as you. They'd pull it out, saying, "I can't work with this sales team because they're giving me a load of crap every time." And they're creating an impossible scenario for me instead of creating a really good ecosystem of goodwill and leverage, with our existing customer base. So, I'm not going to sit here and say don't be aggressive, but I think the reality of it is you have to be really careful and really strategic and treat these relationships like a partnership, not like a back alley sales job. That you feel like you can take a shower after you sort of deal with somebody. What's it going to take to get you in this car today? That doesn't work.
That is a really, really good point. And I don't think, I don't think a lot of people, this isn't something talked about, because from a sales perspective, like you said, it's a metric game, right? So if I'm selling stuff, I'm aggressive, and I'm getting these deals closed, I get rewarded for that.
Yes,
so
you do.
I think I'm doing the right thing. Is it, I can look at it from another perspective. Listen, we talked to the product team, and you said that, these features are going to be live. It's not my fault they're not live yet. I can't control that. This is what I was told. This is the direction, our roadmap. And I just communicated that to the customer. I didn't know that our roadmap is not necessarily, we're not there yet. Is that my fault? So it's interesting when you look at it, because once you start, And I like what you said. If you think about it like a partnership, right? The whole idea of a partnership is that we're going to be in this for a while together. Think about it like a one time sale. It's like, all right, I sold it. We're good. I'm done. I'm on to the next. But a partnership implies I'm going to have to deal with you. I'm
Yeah.
going to have to come back and deal with you, talk to you. We're going to have to figure things out. When you're stuck, I'm stuck. I want to help you get through it. So, you know, so if you had to give advice to a salesperson who just started in an organization, they have to hit certain goals. So they come from somewhat of an aggressive background. What would that
Mhm.
advice based on what we just talked about?
I go back to this concept of partnership. I think there are a population, of sales bros, and I'll use that term intentionally, that are very sort of high pressure, high tactic, folks, that they can make a lot of money, flipping deals, constantly, and they're good at it. That doesn't necessarily always build a durable company. And, I think that's where this executive layer comes in that's so critical, because you have to think two or three moves ahead and say, no, no, no. The goal is to grow revenue, but the goal is also to build a durable company, right? A sustainable company. You can't sustain a business if you are churning deals constantly. Great, we closed a $50,000 deal, but it went out the door 3 months later. That's no good, right? That stinks. Actually, that hurts tremendously. So I don't know. My advice is, look. I've done every job in an organization, every job in a startup, except for hands on keyboards. I'm not a developer, so I haven't done that. Um, Doing sales and sales is a weird term, because I think it can sort of suggest, you know used car salesman, or something like that. But it's the hardest job out there. It really, really is difficult to do and do well, because you have to balance so many things. But my advice would be, always keep the relationship. It's a relationship business. Always focus on the relationship. It's not a transaction. If you think it's a transaction, you know, pick and choose your battles, really, really well. But at the end of the day, it's about creating a good partnership, a good relationship with that prospect, converting them into a client, pulling them on the same side of the table as you are. Sales is really interesting, because I think it's less about creating an environment for selling, but really good salespeople create an environment for buying. And that might sound a little kind of weird, but there are two sides to the coin, and really good salespeople do create a partnership that translates into sort of durable business. But it allows folks to be on the same side of the table and create that buying environment instead of a selling environment, right? So that would be my kind of advice. And a partnership is a relationship. So you have to actively listen as much as you actively talk in those types of things. And you've seen it a million times, Namdi, like, the salesperson that just doesn't stop talking. They feel like that's what they got to do. Oh, it does this and it does that and it does this. Instead of saying, what problem do you have? Oh, we can solve that.
I want to get into what you just said, because I think that's deep. I think like let's go back to that. Create a buying environment versus a selling environment. Can
Mhm.
we explore that? Because I, wa- I want to really get to what do you mean by that? Because I don't want that to go over everyone's head. Because I think we should stick there. What exactly do you mean? Can you break that down?
Yeah, look, I mean, and look at, we all suffer from this to some extent. We all sell. Everybody sells constantly. All right, whether you want to believe it or not, you might be selling to your partner, you might be selling to, a date, you're constantly kind of selling. But I think what we have to be careful of is to tell people how great we are. Let me tell you, Andy, about how great I am. I'm just going to tell you about, and you know what? You're going to be so impressed that you're going to be like, yes, yes, Matt, I'm buying whatever you're selling. That doesn't work. Like that might have worked 10, 15 years ago. Buyers are more informed than ever. Accessibility to information is enormous. There's very few things that you can't figure out on your own. The key to creating a buying process is aligning on the problems and then the solution. We get into this all the time, with prospects in my life. It's like, yeah, I hear you, but I don't know what you do. And it actually doesn't relate to me because nobody asked me what my problem was. And I'm simplifying it. But I think there is sort of this art, that really, really good sales organizations do well, is that they create an environment for buying versus an environment for selling.
Okay, I totally understand what you mean. So, instead of touting, hey Matt, I've been doing this. I'm at this amount of episodes. Hey, talk about you. Like
Yeah.
when's the last time you were interviewed, or
Mhm.
what different podcasts have you been on? What didn't you like about that?
Yeah.
Oh, what new products are you going to release? Do you want to talk about that sometime? So
Mhm.
it's that's the buying environment. That's an example in this scenario. Okay,
That's right. That's right.
totally understand. I wanna now go back to the chief revenue officer and the various internal. I'm going to use the word partnerships because you've been using it,
Yeah.
but internal partnerships that you have to forge. So
Sure.
we talk a lot about product-led growth. So in your strategy role, how do you not interact with the head of product, right? The people managing
Mhm.
your the product in the company, like one of the product owners and so forth.
You have to. It's critical. It's absolutely critical. Like if you can't create, a relationship, you know, y- at the end of the day, you're selling a product. That means you have to know the product really, really well. But it also means that you have to know your target audience or your ICP or whatever you want to call it. You have to know that really well. And you constantly have to be curious. You constantly have to ask questions. You can't be dogmatic about it, and I use the term active listening, and just continue to kind of switch on to that. But there's a feedback loop that's really critical there to be able to bring those learnings back. And it can be a long distance in organizations between sales and product. But part of the job is to shorten that and to create an environment where it's like, this is what people are saying. This is what they're saying they want and need. We don't do it right now. Should we do it? Or people really want that. We're kind of giving it away for free right now. Do we bifurcate the product, to some extent to create another buying experience for those folks? So, I think internal stakeholders and buy-in is critical. The obvious things from a revenue team perspective, and I can tell you, at our organization, we have a revenue team that includes product because they are part of the revenue solution. If our product stinks, I don't care how good a salesperson you are. And the only way you improve that is through constant iterations and constant feedback. So, the internal stakeholders are critical: customer success, account management, product, and of course, marketing.
So if you look at typical meetings you have, those are the people
Mhm.
that you interface. Those are the roles you interface with.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And when you what's your interaction from a chief revenue officer perspective with the CEO, or is it like when do you have to interface or give that role information? Like what my goal here is, I want to understand how you interface interact with the different executives from an executive team, but also the supporting roles, the like you said, VP of sales, the product owner, dealing with the success team. I'm just trying to understand that synergy. How does all that work from the chief revenue officer's perspective?
Yeah. Look, I mean, I think in the right organization, just not talking about me, but talking about the
Yeah.
role, you have to be able to bring all of these things together. And I think, from my perspective and having worked in the role and having had people in that role, a lot of times It is sort of an extension of the CEO's reach and capabilities, right? And that's kind of really incredible because at the end of the day, the CEO is responsible and accountable for everything. Well, maybe not responsible for everything, but accountable for everything. The big metric that people are going to look at is the growth of the organization. Are you growing or not? Because that's really the only thing that matters. So I don't know. It's the interactions are critical. Transparency and trust are critical. So it's just like in any organization, Namdi. I mean, you have to build those internal stakeholder relationships, build trust, build confidence, just as much as you have to do it with a prospect, right? And so if I was just an individual contributor salesperson, I wouldn't worry about those things. I'd be like, I have a quota. I'm going to put my head down. I'm going to pick up the phone and I'm going to call. Exactly. Perfect. That's what you do. But I think, when you talk about the CRO role, it encompasses a lot more, from the strategy perspective of the business as well as execution. You're going to get graded on your execution and your ability, to grow the business, but it requires bringing together all the aspects of the business, all of them, into kind of a cohesive stream.
And with the chief revenue officer, when you look at, let's say the company wants to make a pivot in terms of their revenue model, you're intricately involved with that, obviously.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
So you think about things like pricing, you think about things like go to market, you think about things like, channel and messaging and, all of these things that go beyond just tactically selling. It's involved in every aspect of that, every aspect, because, we tend to know this, and, especially in startup early stage stuff, like you don't have stuff figured out. You just don't have it figured out. Pricing models change all the time.
Yeah.
And that's innovation, by the way. That's innovation. Like you can innovate on technology, but you can also innovate on your commercial model as well. And, I've seen a lot of companies be very successful at taking a widget that's sold, one way, and that's the only way it's ever been solved, to say, wait a minute, maybe we can think about this a little bit differently. So innovation can happen at a lot of different points inside of an organization. And one of them could be the pricing commercial revenue model of a company. I think that's where, good people shine, is the ability to sort of do that and to pivot and give what the market's taking, take what the market's giving them.
I would assume even if it was an opportunity to create a new market, maybe there's a batch of users that there's a demographic we're not targeting that we think our product or service can excel in. That's something that the CRO would have to be involved with.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Very, very, very. No, I find this whole thing like very interested in looking at that role. I want to do a counter question.
Mm-hmm.
What makes for a bad CRO?
Look,
they're good, but what makes for a bad one? Like this. Some of the things that the do not do's, or some of the things that this person is just not, he's not doing in his role. Obviously, but beyond just meeting certain metrics.
Yeah, I look. I mean, it's like, it's a good question. It's an interesting question. I go back to, the comment I made earlier, which is, it's while it's a strategic role, it's still a performance role, right? And so what makes a bad CRO? Well, if you don't hit your numbers, if you don't grow the business, it becomes very binary, right? And it's interesting. Sales and marketing people have the shortest tenures, in businesses. I don't know, it's like 18 months or something like that, right? So there's a lot of pressure and there's a lot of metrics on kind of performance. Because you didn't hit your numbers, and I'm going to contradict myself, doesn't make you a bad CRO. It could be market timing, it could have been pricing, it could have been product. It could have been a million things that contributed to a perceived lack of traction. But at the end of the day, if you're not a jerk and you're growing the business, that's probably a pretty good starting point. I think bad CROs or bad people in general is they lose sight of sort of the strategy, and then have the inability to execute. And execution is really interesting because it's not just saying, hey, I'm a sales guy, I'm an individual contributor, and I'm going to go do this. And look at me, my numbers are great. You got to build an environment for success and a culture for success. And if I've seen people fail in those roles, is to kind of lose sight of that. You have to create an environment where you can bring people into the organization and they can do well and succeed. So, if you think about things like in a sales organization, do you have a good training program? Is there ability to get people up and running quickly? Are you hiring the right people? And maybe now in the winding, road, I'm going to answer my question, which is, or your question, which is, the performance is always going to be there, and that's going to be a measure, but it's kind of indicative of the environment and the team you build. Hiring salespeople is really, really challenging, because you don't know if this person is going to work out. You want them to work out, but you don't know, and you won't know until 3-4 months go by. And, if you talk to, a million sales leaders, they're probably going to say that's the biggest challenge they have, is hiring people. Because you're more apt to make a mistake than you are to get it right. And the cost of getting it wrong is really expensive.
Cost of getting it wrong is really expensive. I like that. I want to, 'cause I know we're coming towards the end of the show, and I want to touch base on one aspect of your role is strategy. You mentioned that.
Mhm.
How does that work in terms of your interaction with your team, in terms of mapping out the strategy? What does that process look like? I'm really curious about that.
Yeah, strategy is always interesting because especially in startup land, it's like, oh, the last thing we need is another strategic thinker. Like, we just need doers. Like, people are just going to go out and execute. So there is a balance between those two things. I've always been an early stage guy, so what that means a lot, for me is things are messy, until they're not messy. And you got to be comfortable living in kind of the messiness. So it's a long way of saying, do I have, this, corporate strategy devised, and I remember, talking to our current CEO, Trevor, when, I was joining Interval. And I think there was a question along the way as we were getting to know each other. He's like, what's your playbook? I'm like, playbook? Like, what are you talking about? There's no playbook. Now there is, but there really isn't, because, everything is so rapid and so quickly moving that for me, part of the strategy isn't to get locked into something that's dogmatic, because there's so many things we don't know. But one of the things that we started doing this year, which, is proven to be very helpful from a strategy perspective, is to establish OKRs, right, inside of an organization. And I've done those with some varying degree of success, but I'm really excited about it this time around because it does define your strategy, and it does provide some perspective around what we need to do. And it goes back, Mandy, to those three pillars of measurement that I mentioned, right? Are we growing pipeline? Are we closing deals and growing revenue? And are we expanding our customers? Those three things. The strategy around that involves product, customer success, account management, marketing, et cetera, et cetera. But by keeping those three things at the top of the list, that's all we care about. So from a strategy perspective, it eliminates distractions. You've been in startups, you've been in companies, you know that there can be a tendency to develop and deliver vanity metrics, and those things are interesting. But at the end of the day, I just care about deals going to the pipeline, a qualified deal. Yes, there's a lot of work that goes into getting that there. But if we're to measure things as an organization, that's all that matters. And that drives your strategy. That drives your strategy.
So with OKRs, just for everyone, objectives and key results.
Mhm.
So when you put those OKRs, you're putting it around those three metrics that you mentioned.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay. And you're using that. I like what you said with the comment from you and Travis. Like, so what's your playbook? Because it's kind of so to my question. Like, but you're like, there is no playbook. It's like I'm the playbook. Like, I'm gonna come in. I have to look at what you're currently doing and where we're
Mhm.
currently going, and then
Right.
and then we're gonna customize it and create a strategy right now. But I'm not coming with some. Okay, here's what we're gonna do. This is what worked in the past. There's elements of your experience, obviously, that you're going to
Yeah,
leverage,
100%.
of
Yeah.
course,
Yeah.
but it's not like, hey, here's step one, here's step two, here's step three, because every company is different, right? It's like a snowflake.
It's like a snowflake, and every industry is different. And we put this umbrella as fintech, but fintech is so disperse underneath that. It's such a big sort of title, and motions are going to be different. Are you mid-market? Are you small, medium-sized businesses? Are you banks? Are you financial services companies? Are you enterprise? There's so many different components that go into that. And I think one of the challenges too, at least from a CRO perspective, is there are there are so many trends that pop up, so many trends that pop up, and part of the challenge is to try to filter out signal from noise and fit those tactics and techniques into your organization, right? So it's not just, hey, we're going to run this playbook because this is what worked at my other company. Different company, you might take aspects from it. I've had a conversation last night, with someone about, hey, cold calling isn't dead. It's actually the best way to cut through the noise. It's like, oh shoot, what's old is new again, right? So it's taking these pieces and being thoughtful. And look, at the end of the day, this is true in any startup. I don't care if it's a fintech or other industries. You have to make decisions with um, insufficient data. That is the best that you can do. Because if you wait for complete data, you're out of business.
So that's so true and so hard at the same time, especially when you're dealing with people with a science background.
True.
They want, and I'm putting myself in this category.
Mhm.
Um, we want all the information that's possible because we want to
Yeah.
make sure that we're making the most informed decision. And not saying you're absolutely right, but the challenge is when you have insufficient data, inherently it's not the most informed decision, right?
Mm.
So that could be scary for people that are extremely analytical.
That's right. That's right. But that's just what you got to do. You got to make decisions, and you're not going to have all the data.
It's so interesting. I mean, this obviously is the tech behind fintech. I have people, business owners, on Instagram watching it from various fields, and I think what you just said applies. It's universal,
Mhm.
especially. I mean, because like obviously you've done countless startups. You're very successful at it. We intersected at careers, past jobs and stuff like that, and that is just so paramount. is you have to make decisions with insufficient data. And I would assume coming in as a new CRO to an organization and mapping out the strategy and trying to figure things out, you're going to have to do that with not having only, because if you wait, like you said, the ball is moved. You're out of business.
You're done. Yeah, you're done.
The question I have for you, because I know we're almost at time, when you make a decision with insufficient data and you get it wrong, how do you recover from that?
You're gonna get it wrong. Definitionally, you're gonna get it wrong, and there are shades of wrong, right? Is it a recoverable wrong? And it's the old adage is fail fast, right? Which is kind of a hackneyed term, but part of making a decision is monitoring that decision, and if it's the wrong decision, just own it and move on from it, and hopefully it's not catastrophic. Hopefully it's not catastrophic, that it just totally implodes your business. But at the end of the day, that's what we're here to do, is to make tough decisions. And Namdi, a lot of times it can't be done by consensus. As much as people in the organization want it to be done that way, it's just a really inefficient way to go about doing that, right? And a CEO of an organization, and I've been one before. It's like, we work together. It's like sometimes you're just going to make really tough decisions. Definitionally, you're going to get it wrong. Okay.
It's interesting. Every time we talk, I leave with what, I guess in hip hop state, they go like, this is a bar. You always drop at least one, multiple bars, but every time we talk and I interview you and have conversation, I leave with, this is another one. I like this, what we just said. So it's going to be one of my new things that I'm going to be saying is you just have to make decisions with insufficient data. The last time we talked, what I love that you said, and I still talk about it to this day, never apologize for technology.
No.
I love that.
Yeah.
Never heard anyone say that. And when you said it, the last interview, it never apologize for technology.
Yeah.
It's hard. Okay. Never apologize.
Super hard. It's super hard.
That's exactly what you said. So you always leave me with something, and that's going to be something that I'm taking now. Those are my two Matt Beecher.
Good. I love it. I got plenty, by the way. Have me back, and you'll have more.
So you're a friend of the show, so you're definitely going to be back. What we started doing, I don't know if we did this last time you were here. We give at the end of the show, we give the floor to our guests, so you can talk about Interval, things you want to talk about, how people can find you, what you guys do, and I'm going to leave the stage so you can do that.
Yeah, look, let's turn it over to Interval. We're a great company. We're serving wealth managers, accounting firms, banks. We're helping them serve SMB customers better, and we think SMBs are the biggest demographic business owners in the world coming at us. So we're doing some exciting stuff. Feel free to look us up. Inter-val.ai is the website. You can find me on the LinkedIn and all the social channels. But feel free to ping me if you want to talk more.
Just put the website on, so a permanent fixture of this video forever. And look, like I always say, I thank everyone for watching, whether you're watching on Instagram, whether you're watching, waving to some people on Instagram. I see you guys. I appreciate you guys. Whether you're watching on LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube. Thank you for watching the show. Definitely appreciate it. Or whether you're going to watch it live, whether you're watching it tomorrow, next year, I thank you in advance. Also, visit the techbehindfintech.com. We started this newsletter, and it comes out every week. You have your finger on the pulse of industry news going on. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the website and newsletter subscription to this episode. So you just go to techbehindfintech.com /subscribe. And it'll give you updates on all our interviews, industry news, and so forth. So you definitely want to be a part of that. So you have your finger on the pulse. Let me put it on the show, techbehindfintech.com. On that note, Matt, dude, man, it's always amazing, man. And you know the funny thing? I think we talk more on these episodes that we
Yeah.
had offline. It's like, you know, everybody's busy and like, oh, we have to get up. And I'm like, listen, why not just come on my show, man? And
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Anytime. It's always a pleasure. It's always a pleasure chatting with you. Always.
and so listen, thank you for your time. Have a great weekend. Everyone watching, have a wonderful weekend. And we are out. Take care. Cheers.
Thank you.
Understanding the technology that powers the money is essential. Knowing the business drivers that inspire how the money is made is crucial. Bridging the gap between the mind of the technologist and the mind of the business is monumental. That is what TBF is all about. Let's start this never-ending conversation. It's time.